Well, actually, it's not the universities in Wyoming because we only have one. We have one public four-year university and no private universities. We do have a system of community colleges. So it's really about this one university, which is also some of this clarity, right? So we get a more transparent picture. And maybe I'll just sort of answer that influence question with an example. So the University of Wyoming, some years ago, it's probably about 10 years ago, right, decided that it was, well, actually it's a little longer than that, but they decided that they were going to have this very large private effort to raise private money, right? And so what's happened in the country since the Great Recession, and even before that, we saw the amount of public funding coming to universities was in decline, right? It was declining every year. Since the Great Recession, across the board, 25% decline. So universities have a few choices, right? They can reduce faculty and staff, which has been done. They can increase tuition, but there's apparently going to be a limit to that eventually, or they can go after private money. And most universities do all three, and we went after all three. And as a consequence, there were some very large givers from, we might call them investors, from the state of Wyoming, which meant, given our economic situation, meant oil, gas, and coal, both individual families and companies. Well, they wanted something in return. And what they got was what we now call the School of Energy Resources. An entire school with its own faculty, gorgeous facilities, all dedicated to energy. Now there is a token investment in wind, but the lion's share goes to oil, gas, and coal, enhanced oil recovery. So that was the payoff. So what we ended up with, right, was a School of Energy Research, right? Well, in most industries, one of the most expensive parts of an industry is research and development, right? It's uncertain, it's costly, you got to pay people lots, you don't know exactly what you're going to get. So what they essentially bought was an R&D center, all right? And they got it on either tax-free donations, and here's the best part, once they had it built, the university agreed that they would use public money to match dollar for dollar any private money that came into that school. Right? So basically, companies say, well, wait a minute, so we get an R&D center and we get a 50% discount, right, on all of our R&D because it's publicly subsidized. So we're publicly subsidizing the wealthiest corporations in human history because I guess they couldn't afford to do their own research and development. And so what a boon that was, right, for these companies. What I say is it's the equivalent of taxing heroin and developing a program in your medical school to refine sharper needles, right? And so the weird part is a lot of the money that was coming into the state was coming through oil, gas, and coal and was being passed right back the other side to subsidize the R&D for those industries. I mean, it's almost a money laundering operation, but probably not quite in a legal sense. So what did they get? They got a hell of a deal. And so what I've been talking about is the energy industry, but if we sort of back up from that, there were a couple incidents at the university that laid the foundation for what grew into this tremendous corporate subsidy enterprise that we have. The two incidents, they both involved faculty from our College of Law. One of the faculty members was Mark Squillace. He was a friend of mine. And he was supporting a conservation group's efforts to reduce clear cutting in southeastern Wyoming. And he was doing it, I believe, pro bono on his own time. But he was associated with the College of Law, and the forest products industry went berserk. Threatened the law school, threatened to shut down the law school. Big kerfuffle, and the university didn't go to bat. They didn't fire him, but they also didn't go to bat. And then comes along Deb Donahue, another faculty member, who calls into question the publicly subsidized grazing lands in Wyoming, right? Federal lands that are leased at very low rates for livestock grazing. And she raises economic and ecological questions there, publishes a book called Rangelands Revisited, And then there was actually a call in the legislature for defunding the law school. I think it was mostly political posturing, but still the university sort of played it softly, let the furor pass, but really didn't go toe-to-toe, didn't call bullshit on them, right? And so there was this sort of tradition of not getting into the ring. And so we'd already laid the foundation with the forest products industry and with the rangeland grazing industry. And so when the big dog came into the ring, right, the energy industry, it was pretty clear that the university was not going to stand up. And in that case, as I talked about in my presentation, the university buckled in a couple instances, one with the firing of a scientist who offended the energy industry, and the other one with the destruction of artwork that offended the energy industry, and both of those were sanctioned by the highest levels of the administration. Political censorship, in some ways, takes a certain amount of courage, right, for a politician to say, right, you're fired, let's go after him, right, we're going to disallow that. And so these incidents that we get into at the university and other places in the state with state agencies, our biggest art museum in Casper and whatnot, the potency, and sometimes you look at these incidents and you say, wow, they're totally disproportionate. Why is the industry going after a freaking piece of artwork, right? What the heck is that about? It's because it's not really about just that artwork, right? Why did they demand that Dr. Jeff Thine, right, lose his job because he gave an estimate of the amount of water needed for fracking, which they thought was mistaken, but they wouldn't share their data, right? So you think, well, why go after them? Why isn't that disproportionate? Well, what they're doing, I think, is tactically smart, right? You make an example, all right? You post one head on the spear outside the castle door, right? And it's pretty clear that you've sent the message. And so you sacrifice. You spend a little bit of political capital to go after a piece of artwork, an artist, an educator, a scientist. But what you're doing is sending a message, right? And the message is, could be you next time. And so what you're doing is sort of buying self-censorship. And let's face it, an artist has, I know lots of artists, right? They've got a 1,000 different projects going on in their head, and scientists have hundreds of different research opportunities there. And so they're trying to decide among these. And so they're trying to say, well, which one will be funded? Well, that could be a function of politics, right? Which one is going to bring nothing but hassle, headache, and misery if I follow this line, right? Well, I could go over here and do this. It's exciting, it's fun, it's interesting. It might even be in the public good. Sure. So why bring that down on me, right? I saw what happened with Thine. I saw what happened with Chris Drury, the artist. And so these disproportionate sort of punishments or responses by industry are really not just about that moment. They're about creating an atmosphere in which everybody understands that certain lines of creative work and scientific investigation probably aren't worth pursuing given all the other options you have. I take very seriously this concept of tenure. All right, tenure is a very strong protection of my job, which I take to be part of a profoundly important and intimate social contract that I have with the people of the state of Wyoming. And the deal is, right, that they will allow this system to protect me in exchange for me telling them the truth. Right? If I'm not going to tell them the truth, if I'm not going to do the dangerous stuff, then what have I earned, right? I don't need protection. Why do you protect a job that's not in danger, right? So I take it to be a part of the social contract that I will say the things that they can't say, ask the questions they can't ask, write the book for which they would be fired. So that was a big part of my motivation. Now, insofar as that's the case, I'm also not stupid, right? And so the book, manuscript, went through 2 legal reviews with University of New Mexico Press. They wanted to make sure there was nothing whatsoever that could be construed as slander in the book. in fact, the book has over 400 endnotes, so it is as thoroughly documented. When I say somebody said something, then you can go to an endnote and find out what the original source was. So one way of covering yourself, there's this sort of little sort of standard legalism, right? That the strongest defense against slander is the truth. And so I worked very hard to make the book true. I also did two other things. I did consult with attorneys prior to the publication of the book, my own attorneys, to make sure there was nothing in there. And of course, what they invite, I love attorneys. I really do, right? They said, well, there's really nothing in this book that could be reasonably construed as slander. But then on the other hand, this is America. Anybody can sue anybody for anything at any time. There's actually something called a slap suit. And it's an acronym. Basically what it means is it's a suit to punish you economically. The person suing you has no intention of winning. What they want to do is rack up your legal bills, and what it means is that they're monumentally richer than you are, and they're going to punish you via a suit of this sort. And slap suits are not banned in Wyoming. The other thing I did is I was a little bit worried. I thought, well, I did write this book on university time, right? I did it university resources. And so I also in the book have said, and I have done, follow through on this promise, that all of my royalties are sent to PEN America, an organization dedicated to free speech and to freedom of the press around the world and to protecting writers and journalists from oppressive regimes. So I don't make a penny off of the book, and I thought, well, we'll take that away from those who might criticize this venture. So I played defense. I mean, the other thing is, sometimes the best defense is a good offense, right? And so when the book came out, I have gone to 7 communities in Wyoming, presented the book, presented my talk, presented my findings. I went to coal country. I went to gas and oil country. I stood in front of those groups and said, here's the stories. And I must say that I was not always warmly received, but it was never personal. It was never nasty. It was never threatening. It was a good, hard, authentic discussion. And I knew people in these communities, and I know, that they're living close to the margins and that they're depending on these industries in these places. And that's why, we do have a citizens climate change lobby group in Wyoming. And one of the things they're really pushing on is we can't talk about reducing fossil fuels as if there are no social costs. All right? There's real people with real lives and real houses and real kids living in real towns that depend on these real mines and oil fields. And we've got to take seriously their misery as well. They count, right? And if we're not going to take care of the misery we generate, then we're not really serious about dealing with this problem in a holistic, compassionate, and just sense. So it's complicated, but my other strategy was just to be really out there up front. Now, in terms of response, it's kind of funny. So my opening lecture about the book was on the campus of the University of Wyoming, and the sponsor was no university department. It was sponsored by the Sierra Club that was allowed to use university space to host a university researcher, which is sort of bizarre. It was a nice packed house. I was really pleased, but not a single person in the audience was above the level of a department head. No higher administrators, no deans, no associate deans, no provosts, no vice presidents. None of them came to that talk. And so if there's one thing a university is good at, it's passive aggression. We're good at passive aggression. So basically it's been icy silence, which is way better than lawsuits.